Well, at that point, here's the first thing I learned about firewalking. If you take the first step, kind of metaphorically like life, you'll take the second, third, fourth, and fifth. Right? You're not going to stop halfway on that fire lane. And then all of a sudden I'm standing there and I go, oh my gosh, I've burnt myself really bad. I mean, really bad. I can feel my feet are really burnt. And I look at my right foot and it's dirty, but there's no burns. But, it's my left foot. Well, I look at my left foot, it's dirty, but there's no burns. And now I'm experiencing at that moment, definitely, without a doubt, one of the most exhilarating moments of my entire life.
Welcome to Business Therapy, the podcast that explores the intersection of business and mindfulness. In this show, we bring you stories and expert insights on how mindfulness can help you succeed in your career and lead a more fulfilling life. Let's talk about it on Business Therapy.
Hello, everyone. Welcome back to Business Therapy. This is episode 73. Today, I'm Sam Droshak, your host, and our co-host Jonathan Adams is also with us.
Hey, everyone.
And today, we're excited to welcome Dave Albin to the show. Welcome to the show, Dave.
Hey, hi guys. Thanks for having me. Appreciate it.
Yeah, for sure. So today's topic, we're going to really talk about Dave's inspiring life story and some of the challenges and he's overcome in his evolution as a person. But before we do that, I'm just going to throw it back to Dave to get started and just tell us a little about yourself and your background, and then let's start from there.
Sure. Great. My name is Dave Albin, and I am the CEO and founder of Firewalk Productions. We create extreme corporate team building experiences. I live in the northwestern part of the state of North Carolina. I'm in the Appalachian Mountains. I've been up here since 2015. I'm a single dad. I have a son that's going to turn 30 here soon. Lives in Boone, North Carolina, which is about 25 minutes from me. My daughter lives, her name is Dave Albin. She lives about 20 minutes to the west of me. She's given me a beautiful grandson by the name of Caden, who's going to be 6 this year. And then on Friday, Good Friday here, she gave birth to my granddaughter, Charlotte Ray. So if I have a little glow here this morning, that's a good reason for it.
Congratulations.
Thank you. I appreciate that. So from there, to give a little bit about my life story, if you will, you guys, I was born at Queen of Angels Hospital in Hollywood, California. And I was born to a single mom. My mom had two other sons at the time with a different man. And she was working at the Roosevelt Hotel in Hollywood. And by the time I was 5, it was clear she couldn't afford me. So she did a wonderful thing for me in an act of love. And she adopted me out to her sister, which was my aunt. And so I moved from Hollywood to Long Beach, California. And it was a wonderful thing. I lived with Bob and Pat Albin from the time I was 5. And then when I was around 11 years old, my life took a really interesting turn. And they set me down the first day of summer in 1964. This was right after, Kennedy had been assassinated in 63 in November. So the world was still dealing with all that. My father, who was now raising me, who was my uncle, but who I called Dad, worked in the Pentagon. He was a highly decorated officer, and he was pretty concerned about what was going on at the world at that time. And so they set me down that first day of summer in 1964, and they said, David, we have something to tell you. And the next thing I know, I'm sitting at the kitchen table. My mom puts her hand on my hand, and she looks at me, and she said, David, what we need to tell you is we're not your parents. And of course, when you're 11 years old, you're like, what does that mean? I mean, I can't even imagine what they're trying to tell me at this point. Well, as I'm processing that over the next few days, both of them had sworn off alcohol on the day that they adopted me 6 years earlier. Well, they started drinking, both of them, shortly thereafter. Now, I don't know if it was a combination of what was going on in the world, whether it really bothered them that they had to tell me that they weren't my parents. I'm not really sure. I just know they both started drinking. And my dad, Bob Albin, it was affecting him more than my mom. I think my mom was really just drinking with him to try to keep up with him, if that makes any sense.
Mhm.
And so they both, back in those days, when your parents left, they'd leave you alone at 11 years old, right? There was no worry of that. They would call the neighbor across the street and say, hey, Joanne, we're going to the store. We're going to be leaving David at home. If he needs anything, can he just come across the street and knock on your door? And so that's just how things worked back in the mid 60s. And so they left that one day, and I knew where they were hiding the alcohol. I was in a cabinet over there, and I saw this huge change in their behavior. So I was curious, and I went over to the counter, and I opened it up, and I looked down, and I pulled out this big half gallon, and it was brandy. And again, knowing nothing, I poured it into a coffee cup about halfway full, and I downed it. And I'm 11 years old, right? So. And you know what, you guys, I didn't have a chance. I really didn't. I believe I was an alcoholic right on the spot. I started thinking about it. I started planning it. I started, everything seemed to almost start to revolve around booze and alcohol. And as I got older, I drank, and I was able to do it without really my parents even, they had their own problems going on. They really weren't noticing what was going on in my world. And, and so my peer group started to change. I started to hang around people, and I got involved with drugs. From the drugs, at an early age. I mean, by the time I was in junior high school, I was already experimenting with hard drugs. And of course, it just escalates. It never gets better. It gets worse, and it gets worse. And by the time I was 33 years old, I was in my third marriage. I had married a woman who was a bartender, and she had 3 kids. And the reason I married her is because I just thought I would calm down. I thought maybe, if you marry a woman with 3 kids, you'll stop drinking, you'll stop doing drugs. And that's not the way it played out at all. And then one day on June 8th, 1988, I woke up that morning and I said, that's it. I'm done. I'm out. I am not doing this anymore. The amount of physical and emotional pain that I was in was absolutely excruciating. And so I decided that, my only real out is to put a bullet in my head. And so I loaded my pistol. I was in the basement, and I'm now negotiating this whole thing, right? And here's what I knew. When I pull that trigger, my pain stops. And you know what? I wasn't concerned to myself about, what the life thereafter, or going to heaven or hell. I wasn't thinking about any of that. All I know is I wanted the pain to stop. And I knew that if I pulled that trigger, that would happen. Well, then I had a moment of clarity. And that moment of clarity was, and I think most people that have ever been around anyone that was suicidal, we try to tell them the things that are at least what we believe to be true, which is, that's a temporary, that's a permanent answer to a temporary problem. Or, when you commit suicide, you kill everyone around you as well. And the thought I was having is the 3 kids who were my stepkids at the time. And I remember thinking, oh man, if you do that in this basement, that's going to fall on them. If they see it, they'll never forget it. And, we didn't even know what PTSD was back then. And so I just remember thinking, that's not fair. You can't do that to them. So then I was like, okay, well then leave the house, go outside, go out into the woods 100 yards and go do it out there. Go do it out there. And then I thought, well, but you know what? Same thing. They're going to go to school. This is going to permeate all over the neighborhood. The schools are going to know. And those 3 kids are going to have to deal with their stepdad committing suicide. And so I was like, again, that's not right, man. You just can't do that. You've got to find another way to deal with your drug addiction and your alcoholism. And the next thing I know, I have a thought popped in my head. Well, why don't you call Alcoholics Anonymous? Well, you know what's interesting about that, you guys? I had no idea who Alcoholics Anonymous even was. And yet there it was in my head. Mm-hmm. And so I picked up the phone, I gave them a call, and I got this wonderful human being on the phone who to this day I lovingly refer to as Madge. and she was answering intergroup. So anytime anybody would call in for AA help, they have people that they transfer and circle around who answer the phone calls, and you have to have a minimum of certain amount of sobriety, and you have to kind of know what to say and what to do. And Madge was drilling me, man. She was all over me, and she talked like this, right? She probably smoked 2 packs of Pall Mall non-filter cigarettes every day, and she had this really raspy voice. And God love her, man, because she took me through the ringer, man. She was like, are you serious? Do you really want to get sober? Because, if you do, I'm going to send someone to come pick you up, but they can't come over there and try to help you and then you not show. I mean, she was really in my face. And so she did. She made arrangements. She sent a guy to come pick me up. And the next thing I know, this man named Lauren is knocking at my front door. I got into the car with him, and he drove me over to a men's group. And at the time, I was living in Northern Virginia, and it was a place called the Stepping Stones Group of Alcoholics Anonymous. And at that time, there was a house, and it was sitting on 5 acres. And I showed up, and I went to 4 meetings that day. I went to a 12:30, a 4:30, a 6:30, and an 8:30 meeting. And man, did these guys grab a hold of me, because I'm telling them my story. I'm telling them that morning I was getting ready to put a bullet in my head. And so they're really, really comforting me, right? They're showing me a tough love, but they're also saying things to me like, look, I know you feel bad right now, but you never have to feel this bad again. And so they gave me a big book of Alcoholics Anonymous, and they signed it on the front cover. They put their name and they put their phone number. They also gave me a Living Sober book, and they signed it as well. So after 4 meetings, I went home. And when I woke up the next morning, my phone rang at about 8:00, and it was John. And it was one of the guys that had signed my book. And he's all enthusiastic that morning. He's like, "Good morning, Dave. How you feeling? How you doing?" And I'm thinking, I'm like, dude, are you kidding me? I want to kill something. I feel horrible. I want to drink. I want to use, because I knew that if I take a drink or I use a drug, that, because I'm going into delirium tremors at this point. Alcoholism, as you may or may not know, will kill you, right? Because the withdrawals, you start shaking so bad, your internal organs can come apart. It's pretty rough. And he said, well, listen, I know where you live. You told me yesterday, I'm coming over. I'm going to pick you up, and we're going to go to breakfast, and I'm going to take you to a meeting. And so it began. So there I was, day 2. Next thing I know, I'm in a week. Next thing I know, I've got a month of sobriety. And they gave me a little chip, and it said 30 days on it. And I remember looking at that. I was so proud of that chip that I had literally, the first time in my life that I'd ever gone 30 days since I could remember without doing taking a drink or a drug. Yeah. 30 days turned into 60, 60 turned into 90. And they're giving me chips at 60 months, at 60 days, and then 90 days. They gave me a chip at 6 months. They gave me a chip at 9 months. And then I made it, and I got the big chip, if you will. I got a chip for 1 year of sobriety. And again, so that was on June 8th of 1988. And this June coming up, 8th of 2023, I'll have 35 years of sobriety.
Congratulations, first of all.
Thank you.
On your sobriety. There's a lot to that story. I'd like to ask a few questions, if you don't mind, before we go forward.
Yes, absolutely.
It's I know there's such a struggle right now for a lot of people with addiction of various kinds, especially in the world today. Yes. And I want to go back. One point of the story that really struck me was you had this third marriage where you really wanted to get clean, but then in between that and then your attempts at suicide, things must have, I guess, persisted or gotten worse. I guess I'd like you to tell us a little bit more, if you can remember, about, you must have had the self-awareness. There was self-awareness there that something had to change. But then I guess even after that point, you weren't strong enough to do it. I guess talk about that phase a little bit.
Yeah. So, I think every alcoholic at some point gets to a point where they get to a point where they've got court cases, or as we jokingly say in AA, you got puke all over your shoes. You're waking up in places you have no idea how you got there, or what's going on. The marriage that I was in was my third marriage there. And after I got sober, my ex-wife who at the time, she was still drinking. So she lost her drinking buddy. And that's when the marriage started to fall apart. She ended up moving out about 3 months after I got sober. And what was interesting is her oldest daughter ended up staying with me so that she could stay in this high school that she was in. And then when I was 2.5 years sober, I'm starting to learn to function again, right? When you live at that level of alcoholism, you're not sociable at all. You don't know what to talk about. You don't know what to say. You don't know how to act. You really revert back to childhood, and you're just like, you're just very non-communicative because you want to be left alone. Just leave me alone, because the lie that you tell yourself is, well, I'm not hurting anybody but myself. Well, that's BS. I mean, we know that that's just absolutely false. You're hurting everybody around you. So anyway, when I got to about 2.5 years of sobriety, I went to an AA dance. My buddy said, come on, man, we're going to an AA dance. You're going with us. And that's the other beauty about AA, is that they coax you into doing other things. Like, oh, you know how to play golf? Oh, cool. Well, let's go golfing. Well, let's go out to lunch. Well, you know how to play guitar? Great. Let's form a little band and we can go to some open mics. And so I was learning all these things and starting to adapt to, get out there and live my life, because the 12 steps of Alcoholics Anonymous are designed to help you put your life back together, to take care of the wreckage of the past, to admit that you're an alcoholic and come to believe there's a power greater than you that can restore you to sanity. Well, on the other side, there's 12 traditions, and the traditions were designed to work with the group and the people in and around everything that's out there in life. And then in the middle, there's what I call the sweet spot, which is there's a preamble. And what the preamble says is that when anyone anywhere reaches out, I want the hand of AA to be there. And for that, I'm responsible. And I took that to heart, and I became a gatekeeper. I was like, new people would walk in the door, and there I was. I was treating them like they had treated me, right? It's kind of like a multi-level marketing thing, right? Where you learn it, and then, except here, what we're selling is sobriety. And there's a big difference in living sober and living a life of sobriety. And so that's what we're there to do. And I found great refuge in that, and I took that really, really serious. However, to back up to the dance on New Year's Eve, I'm with my buddies. We're there. We're having a good time. And all the guys are over here talking, and all the girls are over here talking. And so after we said Happy New Year's, all doing it sober, which is really kind of out of character for us, right? Because I say today, I drank for 3 reasons. I drank, to avoid pain or gain pleasure, or none of the above. It didn't matter. It's like I could look at something and say, wow, did you guys know it's the 30th year of the bobby pin? Oh, let's go, right? So it didn't matter. You just drink, right? So as I'm leaving the dance, this beautiful blonde comes running up to me, and she stops me and she said, hey, are you leaving? And I said, yes. And she said, would you dance with me before you go? And I looked at her and I said, I don't dance. But you know what? I'll dance with you. And so I did. And that turned into a 23.5-year marriage with 2 kids. And so us both being sober together, living our lives together in sobriety was magical, because we did everything together in sobriety, and we learned together. We grew together. We came to understandings together. And again, going back to me being a gatekeeper, she was doing that with women and I was doing it with the men. So there was a real magical relationship in and around that. And, I started sponsoring guys. I mean, literally. And because we were in Northern Virginia, we were getting a lot of men from DC who were involved with 3-letter agencies. And I'll just leave it at that. I sponsored a guy early on who was the head Secret Service agent at the White House at that time, and which was very, very interesting to me. And, I sponsored a young man by the name of Mark, who was literally one of the very first liver transplants in America. He went to George Washington Hospital, and the transplant team at the time was done by Dr. Rusky, who was, again, one of the very first liver transplant teams in America. And how they do it is they put your name on a list, and it's all based on your numbers, your blood count and how healthy you are and your mindset and a lot of different things. And in fact, Walter Payton was on the same list as Mark was, the kid that I'm sponsoring. And Mark got a liver and Walter Payton didn't. And as you may know, Walter Payton, who had never drank a day in his life that I know of, had liver disease, and he never did get a liver and died as a result. And so, Mark's life was given back to him. And I remember him telling Dr. Rusky when they were getting ready to actually give him the transplant, Mark asked him, he said, "How much time is this going to buy me?" And he said, "Well, it'll probably be about at least 2 years." And Mark said, "Well, my son's going to graduate in 3 years. So you do whatever you got to do to get me 3 years to his graduation." And as you might imagine, Mark did live a little over 3 years, and he was able to attend his son's high school graduation.
Dave, I just have a question. Because it sounds like, obviously been blessed with all these amazing experiences as a result of this change in your life. But you opened up your story by saying that you never had a chance. And at such a young age to be exposed to alcohol and drugs, how do you process your relationship with your parents or going back to that time? Obviously, you've taken a lot of responsibility for all your behavior, but how do you process that and how do you feel toward your childhood now?
Well, Jonathan, that's a really great question. When I was born, 2 months before I was born, my biological father, who was a pilot in Korea, something happened to him. I don't know all the details, but they had to put a plate in his head to save his life. Well, it ended up taking his life too. He talked to my biological mother all the time that the pain was really bad. He didn't know how much longer he could take it. And 2 months before I was born, he told my mom he was going to the grocery store, and she never saw or heard from him again. So I've never seen my dad. I have no pictures of him. I have no information from him other than his name is on my certificate of live birth. And in growing up, it was like, wow, I had a dad who took care of me to as best he could with his own alcoholism, because both of my adopted parents died before I got sober. Now, my mother, my biological mother, lived long enough to see me sober. So in the final days of her life, we brought her from California. I was living on a farm in the Shenandoah Valley of Virginia, and we brought her to my house, and she lived her final days there with me. But to back up about my biological father, I just kind of came to the conclusion. I'm like, the man did the best he could. I'm here, and I'm grateful. And I'm sure if he wasn't in all that excruciating pain, hopefully he would have been able to meet me and see me, and I would have had that relationship. But I never dwelled on it. I didn't create this idea because I never met my father that was going to damage me in any way, or I wasn't going to play the victim card, if you will. And then something really magical happened to me as a result of my attitude about my biological father. And that was one day I'm with my son, and we're at a restaurant in Boone, North Carolina. It's a seafood place. We like to go there once in a while. And I'm a guy that really, really, really likes to take care of the servers. I learned this from Tony Robbins, who I worked for almost 20 years. And so when I go in, I'm really nice to them and friendly. And I just go out of my way to make them feel special. And I'm very thankful and very grateful to them and show that, it's one thing to give them money, but it's another thing to actually take a picture with them and that kind of thing and really influence them in a very positive way. Well, I'm doing that with this girl who's, taking care of us, me and my son. And my son and I are eating. And all of a sudden I look at my son and I just go, boom. I'm like, oh my gosh, that's my dad's grandson. And it dawned on me that though I may never see my biological father, I'm seeing my dad in my son. And it was such a great gift. It was like, wow, and I don't think that if I had remained open to, whatever happens with that I would have ever had that breakthrough experience in terms of that magical moment that day at that restaurant.
That's really, really beautiful. And yeah, I mean, I hope everyone's listening on what you need to do to be open to a moment like that and to enjoy it and even see that it happened. So that's beautiful.
Thank you.
We live in a time now where people don't take as much responsibility sometimes, it seems, and often are very aware of what has happened to them. And that narrative becomes almost their identity on some level. What advice would you give to people? Because you clearly in your story, even beyond your biological father, you can go back and just be angry at your childhood and not take responsibility for anything. On some level, you could point to this, you could point to that. What advice would you give to people to get past that, or to how to process the anger or anything else that naturally would come up?
Be brutally honest with yourself. Be grateful. Fear does not exist where gratitude is present, in my humble opinion. I've found that to be true in AA. I've also found it to be true in the personal development industry. Every single thing that happens.
Fear does not exist where gratitude is present. I just want to.
Fear, they can't occupy the same space at the same time, right? If you're grateful, it's pretty darn hard to be fearful. And so I found that magical piece, right? And again, I found that in AA. Being around some of these older guys, the old timers, as we like to call them, or as they refer to me these days. You hear these bits of wisdom, these sound bites from all these guys who've been sober for years and years and years. A couple things to answer that question, Jonathan, and to talk a little bit about that part for people, what they tell themselves, right? I was able to go back to my father's grave, who's buried in Arlington. It's called Arlington West. Which is in Riverside, California. Obviously, Arlington East is in D.C. Well, they have a huge cemetery in Southern California called Arlington West. My father's buried there because of military. And I went back when I got my 10-year chip, and I took that chip and I put it at his headstone. And I left it there for him because he pretty much ended up dying of alcoholism as well. I did the same thing to the mother that raised me. I went to her grave and I put up one of my 8A medallions at her headstone as well. So it was a way for me to make amends. It was a way for me to make restitution and reconcile with that part and forgive them. Because one of my guys in AA told me straight up, he goes, look, when you forgive another human being, you're doing that for you. You're not necessarily doing it for them. And if they benefit, great. So I just wanted that moment to go to their grave and experience that. And then, we all have our story or stories, and every single thing that happens to all of us, no matter how good or bad, we create a story about it. Well, the beauty about that is we're the ones that are in charge. We're the ones that have our finger on the on and off switch. We have the ones that have the hand on the volume control. And so, if you want to change your life, change your story. And you can either create a story that's empowering, or you can create the victim story. And I would encourage you to create a story that empowers you. Because what I've learned over the years is a lot of people don't need a lot sometimes other than a little bit of encouragement. They need someone to say, hey, you know what? I care and I got your back. And you have to be truthful with that, and you have to be congruent with that, or otherwise they're going to know. And again, because I got to spend, because AA brought me to a point, actually what happened is I had insomnia. Early on when I got sober, I had insomnia. And I couldn't sleep. My sleep patterns were all over the place. And one night I was up late, and there was an infomercial for a guy by the name of Tony Robbins. And so, Gunthy Ranker was promoting Tony back then. And here's this young, enthusiastic, really motivated guy. And I really didn't like him at first. He was just way too motivated for me because I'm miserable at this point, right? So I don't want to be around too much enthusiasm. And all of a sudden he said something that really, really affected me. And he said, we'll do more to avoid pain than we will to gain pleasure. And I remember thinking, whoa, that is so true. And I'm in a lot of pain, so maybe I should keep listening to this guy. And then he said something that caused me to buy his program. And he said, the two motivating factors in our life is inspiration and desperation. And I remember thinking, wow, I'm pretty desperate. So let me buy this program. It was like I tapped my American Express card out at that point, and I bought it. Was $179. And to date this, you guys, it came on little white things called cassette tapes. Right. And so, he sent it to me. I plugged them in, and I did what the man told me to do, and it worked. And so that launched me into the personal development industry. In fact, the business that I'm in today was a result of actually going to a live event with Tony Robbins. I bought that program in 88, maybe the beginning of 89, right in that ballpark. And then 7 years later, in 1995, Tony came to town with a live event called UPW, which is Unleash the Power Within, the Firewalk Experience. Well, I decided to go to that event, but I decided I was not going to do the Firewalk. I was like, nah, ain't doing that, boys and girls. That's a hard no for me. And you know what's interesting, you guys? I didn't even know what a Firewalk was. I just knew that it didn't sound like anything that I wanted to do.
So what, for our audience, what is a firewalk? If you could give us just a quick summary.
Course. So a firewalk is where, you walk on hot coals. It's been around for hundreds, probably closer to thousands of years. And how we do that is you build a giant fire, you let it burn all day, and the wood burns down and it renders to a big pile of coals. And then we take those coals and we take a lane of sod, of grass, which is, 3 feet wide, maybe 18 feet long. And then we take the coals with a flathead shovel and we sprinkle them over the top of that grass. And then that's what you walk on. So that's what Tony did. Right. I remember getting to the seminar at like 2:00 in the afternoon. And the next thing I know, it's after midnight. So we've been in a room for 10 hours with this guy. And that's basically all he does is he gets you prepared for it. Well, I'm not going to do it. Right. I decided when I found out, I decided that night, nope, I'm not doing it. And so there's a point at the seminar, just because he's getting ready to take you outside. He says, take your shoes off. And I'm like, oh boy. No. You're not going to trick me, pal. I ain't falling for that one. And then all of a sudden it dawns on me, well, wait a minute. If you walk out there with 3,500 people, that's how many people were at this event, and they've all taken their shoes off and you've got your shoes on, you know what they're going to think about you, right? That you're a coward and you're chickening out. So I'm like, well, I'll just take my shoes off and fake it. No one's going to know. Right? Well, of course someone's going to know. I'm going to know. So I take my shoes off and it starts to get a lot worse, right? Because as soon as you go outside into this giant parking lot, Tony's got African drummers, right? So and he's got everybody chanting, walking out there. So now you got 3,500 people walking out there going, yes, yes, yes. And they're in this trance, right? And they've been in a room for 10 hours. And then there's African drums. So it's dun, 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 dun. And you're like, you've got to be kidding me. What kind of a dog and pony show is this? So what I decided to do, you guys, is like, I'm just going to go hide out in the back. Nobody's going to know. I'll be back there. It'll all be good. Well, not so much. Because Tony wants you to go through the event. He wants you to do the firewalk because he knows it's going to change your life. So he's going to try to do everything he can to get you across those coals. So I'm hiding in the back, which I think is a good idea. Not so much. Why? Because Tony's people know where all the cowards are. And so I'm back there. And so what Tony teaches them to do is like, go back there, make eye contact with them. And once you make eye contact, don't take your eyes off them. And so sure enough, I'm back there by myself. And here comes this guy. And he makes eye contact with me. And I'm thinking, oh, no. I don't think so, pal. I've got a martial arts background. I can kill you 10 ways from the front. And that's just from the front. And so he gets maybe 20 feet from me, right? And he looks at me and he kind of looks at me real strange, kind of leans into me and he says, "Are you okay?" And when we're not okay, what do we say? "I'm fine. All good here, man. No worries here, man. We're good." And then here's a perfect stranger, you guys. He asked me one question, a couple questions actually, that changed my life forever. Because he asked me, he says, "Well, are you going to walk tonight?" And I said, "Absolutely not. Like, didn't you get the memo?" And he goes, "Well, that's cool, man." He goes, "No problem. We don't want you to do anything you don't want to do." And then he said, "But wouldn't you at least like to watch?" And I'm like, "Well, yeah, I'd like to do that. Sure, I'd like to watch these people burn their feet off." Well, now to set the stage here, I'm standing in front of, when you get out of the parking lot, again, Tony builds this giant fire. He builds it on a pit of grass and sod, probably 5 or 6 layers thick. And it's probably 20 feet wide and it's probably 60 feet long. And they started burning it at 2 and now it's after midnight. So it's got this giant pile of coals. And so what they would do is they would load those coals in a wheelbarrow and then they bring the wheelbarrow over in between 2 lanes of sod. Again, 3 feet wide, 18 feet long. And somebody would shovel those coals on top of those lanes of sod. That's what you walk on. Well, I'm sitting in front of 3,500 people. I'm 100 yards from where they're doing it. I can't see anything. I can hear them, but I can't see anything. So he just says, "Well, you're not going to be able to see anything from where you are. You're going to need to get in line." Right? So, and in his defense, he's telling the truth. He's not lying. And so I get in line. And I'm sitting there, it's around 12:30 at night. The moon's out. It's a beautiful summer night. And all of a sudden, this guy comes up to me and he whispers in my ear and he says, "He knows when you're ready. When he says go, you go." And all of a sudden, choom, and he was like gone. He just disappeared into the night. And I'm like, what was that? And then I'm walking along and all of a sudden, again, I can't see anything in front of me, but all of a sudden I can see at an angle, right? And I'm looking and they're doing it, you guys. Every race, creed, and color. They're walking on fire. And I'm like, what in the hell is going on? How could they be doing this? Why are they doing this? You're right. Your brain is, I've never seen this before, right? I have no references. So my brain has no answers. It's just, it's going crazy. And I'm looking and I'm looking and I'm looking and all of a sudden, boom, guess where I am?
Front of the line.
I'm at the front of the line. And all of a sudden I look down and there's the lane of coals and they're glowing bright red and the wheelbarrow's there and it's full of coals and you can feel the heat coming off. And I'm staring into the abyss. I am out of my mind with fear. My heart's pumping out of my chest. And as I'm staring down, there's a trainer standing there. And all of a sudden the trainer goes, "Eyes up." Oh, God. Yeah, right. Gotcha. I'm in a room for 10 hours with Robbins. Guess what he teaches you to do? Keep your eyes up. Don't stare at what you fear. Keep your eyes up. Look to the celebration end. That's where the change is going to come from. And so now my eyes are up and he said, "Squeeze your fist and say yes." And I went, "Yes." And he went, "Stronger." And I went, "Yes." Well, he could tell I was leaving a lot on the table. I was not in a peak state at all. And all of a sudden, so he screams at me, "Stronger." And so now I'm kind of like angry, right? Fight or flight. I threw my hands in the air. I screamed at the top of my lungs, "Yes." And he goes, "Go, go, go." I took off. Well, Tony positions 2 people at the end and they interlock arms and they stop you. And they're like, "Stop, wipe your feet and celebrate." Well, at that point, here's the first thing I learned about firewalking. If you take the first step, kind of metaphorically like life, you'll take the second, third, fourth, and fifth. Right? You're not going to stop halfway on that fire lane. And then all of a sudden I'm standing there and I go, "Oh my gosh, I've burnt myself really bad. I mean, really bad. I can feel my feet are really burnt." And I look at my right foot and it's dirty, but there's no burns. But, it's my left foot. Well, I look at my left foot. It's dirty, but there's no burns. And now I'm experiencing at that moment, definitely, without a doubt, one of the most exhilarating moments of my entire life. And here's where it gets interesting, right? I had done it. I walked on coals. They were 1,000 degrees. I didn't burn myself, and I didn't have a clue how I did it. Right? You know what I mean? You ever done something and you go, how did I do that? Right? You're like, that's right. This guy, I did it. Right? But I had no idea. And here's where it got really magical. The next day, I come into the event, remember day 2 of a 4-day event, and I'm standing in the foyer with 3,500 people getting ready to go into the venue. And I'd never experienced anything like this in my entire life. Humanistically, because their frequency and their belief systems had been so raised up, they were communicating humanistically on anything I'd ever experienced. People were laughing, they were crying, they were talking, they were hugging, they were patting each other on the back, they were sharing their stories, and it was just unbelievable. And to this day, I've never seen anything like it, except for being in the foyer the next day after a Tony Robbins seminar, after they've done a firewalk. It's absolutely incredible.
I just have to ask, how does it work? How come you don't burn your feet?
My company and I went on to work for Tony. That's what got me. Right after that, I did that. I got involved with Tony's companies. I had a military background, a security background. I helped start taking care of his celebrities. And then I got on the fire team. And then I got hired to take over all of Tony's firewalks globally. That happened in 2003. In 2005, we set a world record. We firewalked 12,500 people. And I've been asked this question a ton, like, what is it? How come you're not burning your feet? And you know what my answer is, you guys? I don't have a clue. I just don't. I mean, I can hallucinate. I can tell you what I think, but I don't know. Mythbusters tried to get this figured out. They didn't get it figured out. I can tell you that because the one guy burnt the hell out of himself. Here's all I know. Between Tony and I, we've walked hundreds of thousands of people. My daughter was 6 years old the first time she walked. My son was 9 years old. We've walked every celebrity you can imagine. And all I know is that there's something about being in a peak state. There's something about believing. There's something about trusting the process and giving in to the fire and trusting it. I do know that if you bring your ego to the fire, chances are you're going to get some blisters. But I've never seen anybody hospitalized. I've never, we've never sued us.
This sounds so almost identical to AA.
Like, you know what? You nailed it, Jonathan. Absolutely. How does it work? I don't know. Well, there's a lot of camaraderie and brotherhood and sisterhood, and you're hanging out with like-minded people. So when somebody in AA told you something that they went through, they went through it. So there's that congruency, right? Here I don't know, because again, firewalking's been around for over 1,000 years. If you look at the Phoenicians, the people of India, the Indo-Europeans, those guys, before they would go into battle as warriors, they had to do a firewalk the night before. And if they didn't do the firewalk, they weren't allowed to go, which dishonored their family. But the Polynesians, the Hawaiians, the Native American Indians all over the country did firewalking. I'm up here in the Appalachian Mountains in North Carolina, which was inhabited by the Cherokees firewalk. Now, understand, they did it for a different reason. They did it as a rite of passage. They did it as a ceremony, as a graduation, where Tony's using it as an experience to get leverage on you for the rest of the 3 days of the event, so that you can say to yourself, okay, if I can walk on fire that's 1,000 degrees and not burn myself, what else can I do?
The world of possible suddenly expands. So.
Yep, 100%.
And Dave, are you still practicing the firewalking to this day?
Sam, I am. And how that came to be was I'm working for Tony. And again, in 2005, we did a world record. I do want to clarify that Guinness was not there, but we went to London in 2005 and we firewalked the biggest group of people that had ever been firewalked, which was 12,300 people. In 2014, I'm driving down the road, my phone rings, and it's a company called Google. And they reached out to me wanting to know, was I the Dave Albin that put on the firewalks for Tony Robbins? Yes, I am. What can I do for you? And they said, well, we'd like to talk to you about hiring you, unless, of course, you're under some contractual obligation or non-compete. And I'm like, nope, homeboy's a free agent. What are you guys looking to do? And they had 148 executives that were going to graduate in Mountain View at the corporate headquarters. And we actually ended up doing what's called a glass walk. Sometimes firewalking isn't always logistically possible for obviously a lot of reasons. So we created the glass walk experience, and that's where I taught them how to walk on broken glass. And from that experience, from that event, I created Firewalk Productions in 2014. And in fact, after the event, I was sitting at a table having lunch with the executives. And one of the female executives turned to me and she said, hey, Dave, do you know what you have? She goes, can I ask you a question? I said, sure. She said, do you know what you have? And I go, I don't, what do you mean by that? She goes, you realize you're at the top of the hill here. You are the main guy. And she says, we'll tell you that the need for this and the want for this at the corporate level to be able to create this type of a life-changing paradigm shift, corporate team building experience is off the chain. And you're the main guy. I mean, we did find you. We are Google. It's like, yeah, okay. Yeah. You didn't Yelp me, did you? And that was the moment that I went, okay, if Google's telling me that there's a marketplace for this, you might want to take that into consideration. So I literally went back to Tony at the next event and I said, Tony, I love you, but I need to talk to you. And he goes, you're leaving, aren't you? I said, well, I am. And the bottom line is I've got 7 or 8 people on my team right there that can do my job. So you're good. I took care of you. So it is. Yeah, it's time for me to go out and do this for me and my family. In fact, when he hired me full time, Tony paid for my family to go with me. I was homeschooling at the time. And so when I went on the road to when I took over all of Tony's Firewalks in 2003, my first event was in Sydney, Australia. And my kids, and again, my daughter was 6 and my son was around 9 at that point. And so they got to go on the road with me, which was absolutely spectacular.
Well, that's fantastic, Dave. We really appreciate you sharing your story. It's really inspiring. And there's a few parts of just human connection and just you found this inspiration. It sounds like you've been inspired for the last 40 years straight, honestly, just from listening to you. It's very incredible.
Yeah, I have, Sam. I'm a very blessed man. I realize it. And I realize it was a choice. And so I say all the time, look, stop looking for heroes and be one. There's a very, the chances of you being born, I think the number they throw around today is 1 in 400 trillion. One of the things I talk about at my seminars now is that I ask them to go back 12 generations. Go back in your heritage and go back in your lineage of, your ancestry and go back 12 years. That's 400 years. How many people did it take to get you, like us 3 right now? How many people that had through that 12 years had to go through pain and suffering for us to sit here right now on this amazing podcast of yours? 4,094 people. And so what I believe is that all the suffering and everything that they went through gives us the opportunity to rise up and change the trajectory of our families. So, we can create a life that's magnificent. And all we have to do is really just decide to do that.
Great.
If you want to change your life, change your story.
Change your story, man. Yeah. Absolutely.
Those are incredible
100%.
Closing words, I think, for our audience. And again, I appreciate the authenticity and sharing your story and really getting a glimpse of where you started and now where you're at, and really powerful work you're doing, especially at such a scale. So it sounds like you're still out there helping some of the big companies that we all know and have heard of find their motivation, find their inspiration. And we wish you the best of luck in doing that. And I guess just one more closing thought. If anyone wanted to connect with you or they're feeling inspired, do you have any parting words for anyone trying to kind of get into what you do or this kind of work?
Sure. We're still going at it. So if they want to find me, they want to talk to me, all they have to do is go to our website, which is www.firewalkadventures.com. I did recently create what's called the Dave Albin Firewalk Academy. And that's where people, if they're life coaches or they're trainers or an HR department from a corporation wants to send one of their people to us, we will train them. It's a 5-day academy. And I train them on how to do all this, how to create powerful stories and metaphoric experiences. And then we send them back and they get to do that. So that's coming up in October. That information is also on my website. And then all my contact stuff's there too, right? My email and my phone number and all that. So if they have any questions, we'd love to hear from them.
Awesome.
So thanks for asking about that.
Thank you so much. For those of you tuning in, thanks for touching base with us here at Business Therapy. We appreciate you and your support, and we'll talk to you next week. Thanks, everyone.